Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
So good afternoon. Good to see, I see some good friends here this afternoon. Really nice to see you at the Town of Colonie Library. My name is Paul Grondahl. I'm going to be talking today about the Story of Albany, a project that we did at the newspaper. And many people like you, readers, were published in this book. I've got some copies for sale here. I'll describe the project. But it's really nice coming over here. It's just across the street where I've worked since 1984. I'll let you know a little secret. Several reporters and I have found out this is the best place to play hooky. We can kind of come over and read the magazines and the newspapers and hang out in the library. And that and Professor Java's, the coffee shop on Wolf Road, is where you often find a lot of reporters and photographers. But today it's going to be kind of informal, and I look forward to maybe some of your reminiscences and some of your stories, and be happy to answer some questions as well. This project came about, we were looking for an idea to celebrate the history of Albany. We worked on this project during the quadricentennial year, 2009. It was 400 years that Henry Hudson sailed up the Hudson, the river that bore his name. And we're looking for ways of kind of telling the history of Albany, but also in engaging readers. A big part of what we try to do now with our website, timesunion.com, and in our daily stories is to get readers involved. Because what I found in working on this project, and as a reporter, I was kind of one of the lead people involved with it, is that there's nothing like a first-person, first-hand account. And the way to do that was to find and encourage people who lived in Albany, often in the 1920s and the 1930s, 40s, 50s, long before I came to the city. I came here in 1981 as a graduate student. I'm actually from the Pacific Northwest. But I've learned a lot and come to love Albany and learned about a lot of its history. But you know, I could interview everyone in this room and spend an hour or two or a whole day and write a story about your life and your history, but it really wouldn't be as good, as immediate, as detailed as having you write it. So a lot of this project was getting people to share their stories. And I guarantee every one of you have amazing stories and life experiences that would, you know, you could write your own books. And I encourage all of you to write your books, especially for your children, grandchildren, and future generations. I've written several biographies. And it made me start thinking that I need to interview my parents who are in their 80s now, and I've done that and preserved some of the oral history. So it's really important for all of you to get your stories down while you still remember them and share them with your children, grandchildren, and others. So I'll read the introduction to this, and it'll give you an idea of what the project was all about. And then I'll share a couple of the stories that some readers sent to us. And I'm sure some of them will resonate with some of you. Did anyone here live in Albany or grow up in Albany? Oh, great. Excellent. I won't ask how many are Republicans. That would be a loaded question. All right. The commemorative volume you hold in your hands, that's this, tells the story of Albany through the reminiscences of those who currently live in, once lived in, or simply harbor an abiding affection for the capital city. This book reads like a long love letter to Albany, for which we offer no apologies. The stories are as authentic as the city itself, working class and unpretentious in their sensibilities, peppered with the ethnic flavor of its historic neighborhoods, imbued with the warmth of pleasant childhood recollections, brimming with the smells and sounds of its legendary shops and restaurants, and tinged throughout with nostalgia's sepia tones. It is the people's book. It was created by the people, for the people, and of the people of Albany in an openly democratic, parentheses, small d, process. Can't Can't refuse those little jokes, you know. We asked Times Union readers to share stories and to submit photographs about Albany as a way of celebrating both its 2009 All-America City honor and its 400th anniversary of Henry Hudson's 1609 discovery of the river later named for him. Our loyal readers responded with an inspiring array of words and images that included touching family memories, epic tales of history, small moments of community, and charmingly quirky yet memorable anecdotes. The authors of this book are middle school students, octogenarians, and everyone in between. Dozens of stories and hundreds of photographs are posted on the special Story of Albany section of the Times Union website, which can be found at www.timesunion.com, Story of Albany. And it's still up there. And this is about 100 pages and probably has 80 different people. If you still want to read more and go on the website, there's hundreds of photographs and stories and memories. So the web version of this project lives into the new year, etc. And the print version also continues. Despite our best intentions, space limitations prevented us from including all of your submissions and everything that we posted on the website in this book. Editor Tracy Ormsby, who conceived of this project and did heavy lifting to make it happen, selected a variety of the online submissions in consultation with members of the newspaper's editorial staff. We've aimed at a representative sample, and most of the entries were heavily edited or simply briefly summarized due to space constraints. As you read this book, we hope you'll feel like you're flipping through a family scrapbook and that you'll find in the Story of Albany deeply felt memories that resonate with your own recollections. So I thought I'd share a few of them with you. And it was interesting. I bought several copies of this, sent one out to my parents who live in Tacoma, Washington, on the other side of the country. And my mom read it in one night and said it reminded so much of her childhood in the Pacific Northwest, and in Seattle in particular. So hopefully some of these memories will, you know, spur some nice recollections for yourself. Here's one that I had not really heard about. Like I said, I came to Albany in 1981, but this is about election night bonfires. And I'm told they weren't just in Albany, they were in a lot of the cities and communities around here. Does anyone remember going to election night bonfires? Well, hopefully this will, we don't need to check your police record to see if you were, but she'll talk about what it was like, and it was criminal activity even in those days, but it was a great tradition. It's called Election Night Bonfires in the South End by Mary Ellen O'Connor. Is she here? I actually met her before. She submitted a lot of really neat stories, and she's a very good writer. So I'll just read what she wrote. Election day was a couple of weeks away, but the neighborhood kids in the South End were busy collecting wood, tires, and anything else they could burn in anticipation of the election night bonfires. When election day came, you could feel the excitement in the air. The neighborhood kids didn't really care about the elections or the candidates. Our families were Democrats, and they voted for whoever Uncle Dan O'Connell, the party boss, chose. He was a numbers man and knew his chosen candidates always needed a high vote count in every election if he was to maintain his powerful leadership of Albany County. He was a player in national politics because of those numbers, and he was not about to give that up. You could decide to stay home and not go to the polls, but Uncle Dan offered you the sweetener of a $5 bill if you cast your vote. And I did a biography of Mayor Corning and interviewed a lot of people who had lived in Albany their whole lives, and the $5 vote was well established. Does anyone remember that or see that? Yeah. So no surprise there, right? Remember it? Never got it? Okay. That's your story and you're sticking to it. Yeah, with inflation, we might have to sweeten the pot there. After supper, dressed in our best outfits, we all went to vote. My sister, brother, and I took turns going into the voting booth with my mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather as they cast their votes. We anticipated our turn at pulling the lever when we were shown what row to vote on. There was always an air of duty and importance that was conveyed to us on election day, but it was the evening that held the most fun. As soon as we got home from voting, my father would kiss us goodnight, tell us to stay on our front stoop, and, quote, be in the house by 9 o'clock. Then he would leave to ride the fire truck at Engine 4 on Hudson Avenue in anticipation of the election night fires. It was dark and the streets were quiet for a little while. And as if on cue, there was bedlam in the South End. Neighborhood boys came running and screaming, carrying wooden crates, old doors, wooden beams, old fences, and anything else they could grab along the way. In a matter of seconds, huge stacks of rubble grew at the intersections of streets. The pile grew at Park Avenue and Phillip Street as Jimmy Miller and his cousins, Tom and Jerry, kept running back and forth to the hideout. Hey, somebody throw a tire over that hydrant, Jimmy shouted as he ran down Park Avenue carrying a wooden beam. As stacks were being built, neighbors were either standing around watching all the excitement or sitting on their stoops to protect the renegade boys from stealing their steps. Nothing was safe that night. The excitement mounted as somebody appeared with a can of gasoline and began pouring some on the tire around the fire hydrant. Then they drenched the pile that was now reaching close to the power lines. A match was lit, thrown into the bottom of the heap. Whoosh! The blaze roared and the people cheered. There were bonfires from one end of the South End to the other. Fire sirens could be heard in the distance, but as they got nearer and louder, the boys took off in all directions. A fire was put out. The fire truck roared down the street for the second time, put out the fire, and continued on its rounds. But this time, all the wood was used up. It was getting late, and everyone went back into their houses. The action was over for another year. In the early 1960s, the election night bonfires came to a gradual end. The police began to crack down on the perpetrators, and word spread around the neighborhoods that things wouldn't go well for anyone caught setting off a fire on election night. And that's Mary Ellen O'Connor's story. What did you think? Did anyone remember scenes like that? This is what I mean by people being able to tell their stories far better than I could by interviewing them, kind of getting a secondhand account. This is a firsthand account from her childhood that she remembers vividly, and I think she describes it very well. But someone said, is that sort of what you remember from the...
The only thing I could add to that is the guys used to get up in the trees and string toilet paper throughout the trees, and they used to light the toilet paper and watch it.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
What part of the city, was it in Albany?
We were just off Delaware Avenue.
Off Delaware Avenue. Doesn't sound particularly safe, but
It wasn't. We enjoyed it.
if it's dry out there, yeah.
We had the big bonfire, but we never had any problem.
Anyone else remember that? Yes. Hi.
How are you?
Good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. My dad lived on Osborne Street,
Okay.
way down Osborne.
Yeah.
And he used to talk about the bonfires they had on election night.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they did. They brought piles of wood, and it was a big to-do.
It's pretty interesting. It sounds like it got a little rowdy towards the end. Maybe that's why they cracked down. But it's interesting how things go in cycle. I know you've read about, and it's been so much in the news with this kegs and eggs incident on St. Patrick's Day. I always try to keep things in historical perspective because I've learned a lot about 400 years in Albany, and there's nothing really new. I mean, this incident, I'm sure there was alcohol involved. I'm reasonably sure. So I bet these kids, had been drinking or a little bit hyped up, and so things kind of, what goes around comes around, and it sounds like it eventually got out of control. Probably somebody got hurt, maybe something got burned and destroyed. But I mean, it probably started as a fairly innocent and innocuous thing and kept growing. Anyone else remember when they ended? She says the 60s. Again, before my time, but you remember what prompted it? Was there any particular something involved?
Police patrol.
Yeah, police, probably got tired of it. But other cities still do this on Halloween, I know. I think Detroit, out in the Midwest. I know A lot of times after a city wins a national championship in a sport, there's still a lot of fires and things like that. Let me read another one. This one, I think, here's one by Margot Taylor, Growing Up on State in the Heart of the City. One of my earliest childhood memories is waking up from my afternoon nap in our home on State Street in Albany to the sound of the organ grinder on Lark Street. Anyone remember that? His happy tune was pleasing to the ears of passers-by. Some afternoons, my mother took me over to Washington Park to ride on the huge wooden swings or stroll around the lake. I loved to go inside the lake house to buy penny candy or pop a coin in the viewing machine, which had still pictures that flipped, giving the impression of moving pictures. A walk in Washington Park was never complete without a visit to Moses and stops to admire the flowers. This was part of my life growing up in the 40s and 50s in Albany. Many recollections are tied to the Dutch heritage of the city. I loved to attend the early tulip festivals and visit Fort Creo, the Tenbrook Mansion, and Schuyler Mansion. Before Cherry Hill became a museum, my mother and I would stop to have tea with Miss Emily Rankin, the last person to live in the historic old home. On Saturdays, my mother and I might take a trolley down to Pearl Street to shop at Whitney's and Myers department stores. Both stores had wonderful toy departments. At the northeastern corner of State and Pearl, there was a Planters Peanut store. The enticing aroma of roasting peanuts permeated the area. If we were lucky, we'd meet Mr. Peanut Man, who strolled the sidewalk handing out samples. Before catching the trolley back up the hill, we often stopped at Hyler's on State Street for lunch. For a special dinner treat, occasionally my father would take us down to Keeler's Restaurant on State Street. The old Union train station still stands on Broadway. When I was a little girl, we would go there to catch a train to New York City. We'd go shopping in the city and return home at night. I looked forward to spending time in the atmosphere of the old station. I remember the ticket windows, the newsstand, the shoeshine boys, and long wooden benches where travelers waited. I liked to go out on the platforms by the tracks to see trains pulling in and out. Much of the Albany in which I grew up exists only in my memory. In high school, I used to attend basketball games at the Armory next door. I remember the beautiful Prine Library on Pearl Street, and I recall visiting my aunt, whose home was down on Madison Avenue, now part of the South Mall. I spent much time at the Harmanus Bleecker Library at the corner of Washington and Dove. I enjoyed the basement children's room. When I was a child, our milk was delivered at the basement door in glass bottles on alternating days from either Borden's or Normanskill Dairy. As I grew older, I learned that some of my vocabulary came from the fact that Albany had been a Dutch city. We often sat on the front stoop on a warm evening. We walked to Hagman's Bakery on Lark Street for the fresh crullers. We ate coleslaw. We loved the tulips in Washington Park, whose bulbs came from the Netherlands. My older brother went to the old Milne School and then Union College. I attended the Kenwood Academy of the Sacred Heart for 13 years. I have traveled much of the country and have lots of nice memories, but my fondest memories are right at home. I'm a real Albanian, not from Albania, but from Albany, the capital of the Empire State. Did that resonate with anyone? Did anyone meet Mr. Peanut Man?
I did.
Did it? Yeah? I mean, so much of this is coming back. That's why I say the cycles of history. These small kind of boutique dairies, they call them now, that deliver in a glass bottle to your door are coming back. I think Normanskill has always been in business, right? As far as I know, it's continued to be in business.
I remember when they pulled the milk wagon with the horse.
Yeah. I've heard of those stories.
The same way.
I just wrote an obituary and gave the eulogy for my good friend and colleague, Hy Rosen, who was our cartoonist. And his father was the rag man in the South End that used to go with a horse-drawn cart, you know. And his son also spoke at his funeral. It was very moving. He talked about hearing those stories and how far his father had come. and he was remembering the dedication right across from Union Station of the big city seal, the Dutch person and the Native American person life-size sculpture that Hy did. And he talked about how proud he was that day and how Governor Mario Cuomo introduced him. And he said, I looked right past where my father was standing, and it was the backs of all those buildings where his father had collected the trash and rags. And now here his son, Hy Rosen, was getting this honor, and here his sculpture was there. And it was how, you know, through hard work, an immigrant, you know, a poor immigrant family had risen up to the next level. It was very beautiful the way he described it. Did you want to, you were going to say something, sir?
Yes. I grew up in Schenectady. We had a Mr. Peanut store too, and an identical Mr. Peanut figure that would do the same thing. So I'm getting a parallel experience here.
Yeah.
And they say that the olfactory impressions really imprint.
That's what I think.
Peanuts right now.
That's what I think when I read some of these. It is the sense of smell that often brings back the memory for people. People wrote about, it's since closed, but I remember this when I first came to Albany in 1981, the smell of challah being baked at Leo's Bakery, that kind of sweet, buttery, cinnamony smell. And I still love driving by Swinburne Park and smelling, if they're baking, particularly the corn toasties or the chocolate chip cookies in the Freihofer's plant. I go, wow. I mean, that just transports you, the sense of smell. I think it is one of the strongest triggers to memory. I think you're right. Anyone else have any stories they remember, or any of these same? I wasn't around what was Whitney's and Myers like? Were they really high end, or were they better than Kmart and Target and Walmart? I mean, yeah. Anyone care to describe what those were like?
I also got very dressed up.
Oh, did you?
When you went downtown.
See, I love seeing the pictures. I look at a lot of archival pictures, and you see a shot of downtown Albany, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I mean, people were like 5, 6, 7 deep. The sidewalks were crowded, like you see in New York today. You saw a lot of people on the street, and there's such an energy going to a big city now and having that interaction with people. That's one of the great things of going to New York City. But Albany, at least the downtown, seemed to have that at one point. It's too bad.
Worked in the city hall. He was the commissioner of buildings. And every now and again, he would let us climb up to Bell Tower on the city hall. So you got a spectacular view
that's great.
of the surrounding area.
That's great. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
I remember going down to Whitney's to get my Brownie and Girl Scout uniforms, and starting from the top of the hill to the bottom, making sure the bottom of the hill we stopped at the bookstore. I think it was on Broadway, and I was mesmerized by the beautiful books and the pictures. But I mean, it was an event. It was a social event every time we took the bus downtown, my mom and I.
Yeah.
I remember one year, it was back in the 60s, my sister and I were downtown shopping, and it was cameras and police in front of a bank, and she dared me to go over and ask what was happening. They said, you're filming a movie about the Lonely Hearts Club that happened in our area. Was I interested in being in the movie? And I said, sure. He said, meet me down to Jack's at 6. I said, you're filming down here? He said, no, we'll take you to dinner. Of course, I had to ask my parents' permission. I said, your parents and your sister could be in the movie too.
Wow.
So it turned out to be a movie called The Honeymoon Killers. And
yeah, I've written about that. A UAlbany professor, I think, was a producer on it. Yeah, that's a famous murder.
And we were, the scene we were supposed to be in was, I think, in the Waldorf cafeteria. And everybody kept peeking in, so they had to close the drapes. And my sister and I were sitting near the window. We kept looking at the camera. They had to do one take after another take. My parents were naturals to drink their coffee and sit there, because they used to go to the Boulevard every night for coffee.
Oh, the Boulevard, yeah.
And
a lot of people have memories
and
of that.
Tony LaBianca and Shirley Stoller and I and the director all had dinner at Jack's. It was a delicious surf and turf. And then later on, we came to the movie set. And after that, we went to Joe's, and Tony LaBianca was Sandra's escort. He said, what do you think of me? She said, confidentially, I don't think he'll go anywhere. Well, he looked at himself at his knife, his fork, his plate. She said, she said, I'm not used to dating anybody that's wearing more makeup than I do. He was in Fiorello, the touring.
Right, yeah.
He played a pizza shop owner in the French Connection.
Yep.
And every time I see him, I said, the man that never went anywhere. we were supposed to go to a rap party, and my sister didn't have a car. My mother said, oh, those Hollywood types, they could have wild parties and orgies and drugs. We better not go. We better not let, you can't go to the parties. So my sister and I, we ended up on the cutting room floor, but you can still see my parents at the tape of the Honeymoon Killers. You can see them clear as day.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
Thanks. That's a nice memory. Did someone else have their hand up? Yes.
I did write an article, but it was too late, I guess. It was never published. I remember, I lived in Albany. I was born there. From the time I was quite young, we would go to the movies, and it was always 10 cents. And since I was small for my age, I paid 10 cents until I was about 13 or 14. Where my cousin was big for her age, and they started asking her at 10, aren't you? But we went to, I can mention some of these movies, and I know to remember, the Royal, the Eagle, the Leland, the Strand, the Ritz. And then the Palace came, and it was like visiting the king in England. We went to the Palace, we said, and then we went across the street to the White Tower for 10 cents. We got a hamburger and a soda, and I told my mother, I wish she could make hamburgers like they did.
Did anyone else want to? Yes.
I moved to this area in about 78 and bought a home off Fuller Road in Colonie. And next door was an elderly couple who had moved there in the 40s. And they had moved from 2nd Avenue downtown. And they said their family cried when they moved so far away from the Albany.
That's great. Let me read one more. I think this person is really good because he captures the sights and the sounds. And let me see if I can remember who it is. Yeah, this is Memories of Life on Elm Street by Chuck Peters. I think this is the one I'm thinking of. Anyway, I'll read it. As a boy, I grew up on Elm Street in an apartment building across from the Executive Mansion. These are some things I remember from the late 1950s to 60s. I remember the huge Cathedral of All Saints with the towering twin spires and black ornate iron fencing. Not having a yard, I would sneak through the fencing to collect worms after a rainstorm. These worms were used for fishing at Washington Park Lake. I remember the Eagle Theater 2 blocks away at the corner of Hudson Avenue. For a quarter, there were always cartoons and a movie. Sometimes a double feature played. I remember Wiggins' Pet Store on Hudson Avenue and Eagle Street. The store had large windows that wrapped around the corner. They always had dogs, cats, or bunnies on display inside the windows. I remember police headquarters on Eagle Street with the big wooden doors and stone front. In summer, I could peek in when the doors were open. There was always a large officer behind the cage desk area to shoo you away. I remember the big open-air market on Beaver Street, where you could buy many things including livestock, local produce, and fresh baked goods. I remember Rudnick's clothing store, the working man's place to shop. It stood where the rear of the Times Union Center is now. The store had a long, wide metal chute from the first floor to the second. I remember the corner stores on almost every block. Most carried a large assortment of penny candies, 3-cent popsicles, and 5-cent candy bars or sodas. A quarter would go a long way. I remember Plesser Brothers Junkyard on Park Avenue. I would take my red wagon full of old newspapers there to recycle. I received about a penny a pound. Always enough for a trip to the corner store for sweets. I remember Cardinal McCluskey High School, where we played baseball and kickball in the rear parking lot. Of course, this was against the rules. More than one ball was lost over the high brick wall that encircled the Executive Mansion. When it happened, a police officer always showed up to chase us away. I remember in the fall throwing sticks up into the tall chestnut trees on Elm Street. We collected the chestnuts for making bracelets and necklaces for the neighborhood girls. I remember the loud sound of the metal wheels against the cobblestones as the local street sweeper man pushed his hand cart along the streets. I remember PS 8 on Madison Avenue, where I attended kindergarten through 3rd grade. I remember when Freihofers made home deliveries. They carried a 2-tiered tray, like a popcorn vendor at a ball game with their goodies. I was never lucky enough to be on the Freddie Freihofer show, as seen on our black and white TV in the 1950s. I remember the big fire at the Executive Mansion around 1960. Thanks to Rockefeller's dreams of progress, most of my neighborhood was torn down to expand the mansion property and to build his South Mall. And that's Chuck Peters. Is Chuck here? I know Chuck submitted several stories. No? Did that ring a bell with anyone there? Anyone here? See, these stores and places are mostly all gone, at least since I've been here. But Rudnick's clothing store has closed on Central Avenue, right? It went for a long time. It's in Schenectady still? Okay. Here's just the headlines. We lived upstairs from the South Swan Grill. We never had to leave our island, Delaware Avenue. A lucky girl enjoys city life growing up on Myrtle Avenue. Pine Hills in the 1970s. Beloved Washington Park. Corning Park, a hidden gem. I know that one. Here it is. Sights and Sounds of Another Era in Albany. Joseph Basile. Does anyone know him? Is he here? This one I think is just beautifully written. I'll end with this one, and then we can have some discussion if you want. I was a Depression-era child with an older brother and sister, and toys were not an option for us. So the things I remember most were sights and sounds, and I remember that they were happy times. I remember the sound of the ragman's wagon with the steel-rimmed wooden wheels creaking and squeaking as his drawn-out cry of "Rags, any old rags?" His horse barely moved along, and the sound of its tremendous hooves hitting the pavement with an almost painful weight in between. Clop. And then, ages later, the next foot's clop. He carried his head low, almost on the ground, like a hound dog on the scent. Then there was the sound of the coal man. He backed up to the truck and hoisted a big gray canvas bag on his shoulder and walked down the alley, flipped it off his shoulder to a metal ramp going down to the cellar. I remember the clatter, bang, rumble sound of the coal on its way down the chute, and the bell-like sound of the coals hitting the coal already in the bin. The Iceman had a truck, and when he came down Garfield Place, he rang a bell to announce his arrival. We would run ahead and find out what people wanted in order to save him steps. Bobby McMahon's mom wanted 100 pounds because she was making homemade root beer. Jimmy O'Neill's mom was away, so he could skip her. I liked checking with the Mitchells because Teresa was there. Not only was she cute, she had freckles, red hair, and could burp loudly at will. Besides, her father, Terry Mitchell, owned a candy store right around the corner on Watervliet Avenue. What more could a boy ask for? Then the Iceman would shave off some ice for us because we helped. Then there was the sound of the trolley. The trolley made noises, which at that young age were only noises, but in retrospect, they were more like a choir of sounds. For some reason, I needed a series of shots at Dr. Padula's on Madison Avenue. I went every Wednesday for 2 months. I would go down to Watervliet Avenue, which was the end of the line. The trolley stopped there, and the conductor would change the connector to the overhead wire. And sometimes I would help him reverse the highly polished seats so riders would be facing forward. Since it was the end of the line, it was also the start. He would stay there for a few minutes just below Carnival's Market and a short distance from the West Albany Bridge. Then he would ring the bell 3 or 4 times to alert any latecomers before he started up again. The drone of the transformer was like the bass voice. The sound of the wheels on the track, much like the alto and tenor voices. And when we reached the turn at Central, the high pitch of the wheels resisting the turn was like the soprano voices in the total choir. Of course, at the time, it was just noise to me, but noise that I will always remember. At the turn was the Arlington Lunch, and then starting down Central on the opposite corner was the Corner Tavern. Then a newsroom where everyone played the numbers, illegally at the time. Then Gus's little ice cream store right next to the Albany Public Market, which incidentally was owned by my grandfather, Joe Nigro. We would go past the Royal, the Ritz, then the Strand, and as we made the turn up Clinton Avenue, we would pass the Grand and the Palace. Sights and sounds I wish I could record for my children and grandchildren, but those sounds are gone forever. They will remain with me always. So that's Joseph Basile, beautifully written. I'm glad it's in that book so his kids and grandchildren can at least read it. So if anything comes out of this today, I hope that you don't forget to write your stories down and have them preserved so your children and grandchildren can remember what was really important about your time growing up. Thank you very much. We can have some questions and answers if you'd like. I do have some copies of the Story of Albany for sale. It's $25, and $9 of that is the profit, which all goes to the Times Union Hope Fund. We help underprivileged children go to summer camp and after-school programs. It's completely run by us who work at the paper, no overhead cost. Every dollar, every penny goes to the programs. We've raised, on average, $70,000 to $80,000 or so a year. We do a lot of things like bake sales and stuff like that at the paper. The company does a match for it, and we're able to send hundreds of kids to helpful programs. So if you're interested in a copy of the book, I'll be selling them, and you'll help kids at the Times Union Hope Fund too. Anyone else have any questions about? I'll be happy to talk about newspapers or anything else. Or yes.
Someone mentioned her parents drinking coffee on the boulevard. Where was that?
The boulevard is now called Restaurant Paradiso. It's at the corner of Central and Robin. Okay, yeah. And it's where they filmed a scene for the movie Ironweed, and it's got some memorabilia in there of Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep who were in that movie. And it used to be a cafeteria. It was before my time, but what was it like? I heard a lot. It was open late, and people went there.
Beautiful, very nice.
Yeah, but
well run.
But it was like you would come in and order what you wanted with your tray or whatever.
Your ticket. As you come in, you took a ticket from a machine.
And then they punched the ticket with the prices of what you bought.
Oh, really?
Right.
Nice. Yeah. So now it's more of an Italian, pastas and pizza and banquets and stuff like that. But the guy who runs it is when I go there, I always like to talk to what's his first name? Matt Daskalakis, who was a pro baseball player, and he's got great stories about playing in the minor leagues, and he's been in Albany and running that restaurant for a long time. Yes.
Why are you called the Fourth Estate? What does that mean?
The Fourth Estate. I should have a perfect answer for you, but I think it's what is it? Truth, liberty, and the American way. There's something 3, and then we're supposed to be the 4th. The sense that the press is a watchdog role, which we're doing more of. Our colleague and one of the best reporters in terms of investigative reporting I've ever seen come through the Times Union is Brendan Lyons. His father was a publisher when I first came to the paper in 1984. And Brendan digs, and he's fearless, and he's written a lot about corruption in police forces and in state government. So the Fourth Estate is the role where you're supposed to watch out for the people. Where does your taxpayer money go? That kind of thing. So that's where it comes from. I should know the absolute definition, but I never studied journalism, to be honest. I was an English literature major, and I learned on the job, which was still possible when I started, when there were still typewriters and carbon sheets. Now everything's digital and blogs and so fast, and we had editors. But the first day they sat me down to this older gentleman. He said, "Kid, don't worry, I'll tell you, it's not that hard, we can teach you how to do this and that." I never went to journalism school, but I like writing, and I wanted to try newspapering, and his name was Barney Fowler. He was a mentor, and I miss Barney. I sat next to him for a couple years before he retired, and then he died, and his widow gave me his whole shelf of Adirondack books, because he told me all these characters to talk to in the Adirondacks, and he encouraged me. He said, "Kid, you can never go wrong if you want to write about dogs and pets and little kids," he said. People love those stories. But he was famous. His phone rang constantly when we still had rotary phones and these metal desks and linoleum floors. So I'm kind of dating myself. But his phone would ring constantly. He had eyes and ears all over the region, his snitches. Favorite part of his column was "State police vehicle, such and such license plate, outside of Joe's Tavern for 4 hours last Tuesday." And he would call all these people out, and he loved that. He had so many sources feeding him information. He was a great old school journalist. But my point is that he came up, I don't even know if he had a high school degree, let alone a college degree. Now, it's so specialized. There's people that just do visual media like video, and people that just do social media like Facebook and Twitter, and a lot of people who have master's degrees in journalism from Columbia University. So in the 25 to 30 years I've been in the business, that's how it's changed. It's gone from black and white film with chemicals in a dark room to reporters can file instantly anywhere with a cell phone, a laptop, and their digital camera. So everything is accelerated. And unfortunately, I still like telling these kinds of stories, narratives, human interest, but everything, the premium now is on speed, and volume. But I still like to write a good long yarn when I can.
I voted for
So.
you.
Excellent.
The Times Union poll.
Oh, excellent.
Is there a first, second, and third estate? Is that?
Yeah, I think, no, that's what I said. I think it's for the levels of, protecting our civil liberties in the democratic way or whatever. There's the different backstops, and it might even be legislative, executive, and judicial. I think that's actually at the 3 levels. Dan might know, do you?
Well, no, I wasn't going to answer that. I was going to ask you another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to ask you what other things you're working on. You've done some biographies and stuff. Are you working on another big project?
I'm actually doing a little bit of writing for hire, ghostwriting for different people. I have a son who's at Yale University. I'm very proud of him, and it's a very expensive school, though. And newspapers, we haven't seen a raise. At least we have jobs. Thousands of my colleagues, unfortunately, don't. So we haven't had a raise in many years, but so I'm doing some ghostwriting. I've met some interesting people. I wrote one with, he was the ambassador to Hungary. I wrote one for actually Spencer Standish, Albany International. Really interesting history with his family and that company. Started as Albany Felt. The Corning family were one of the founders. So I'm doing some of that right now, but I'll get back to it. I've got some ideas for political biographies, but the publishing business right now, book publishing is a lot like newspapers. It's under strain, it's under stress. Fewer people are buying books. Everyone loves to go to the internet now and get it for free. Nobody wants to pay for anything. So fewer books are being published now, fewer contracts for writers, and a lot fewer jobs in the media too. So that's the reality. Yes?
Is Poppy still around?
Poppy, I'm glad I spent a long time, did a series of Poppy, who was a homeless, crack addicted, mentally ill, but something really worth saving, a good person at his core, a really bright person. I spent well over a year following him. I hear from Poppy every now and then. I saw him probably in the fall, and he was still down by his place in the river, but he lived during the winter in Ravenna. He got his life together somewhat and an apartment again. But I know he's been drinking, because when he calls, he sounds drunk. For a time, he was sober. He was in the Capital City Rescue Mission. And he's tried over the years a lot of different things to kick his addiction. but he's still around. I'll probably do an update on him at some point because he's a good person, and you know, I like when his life sort of gets better. It's tough to see him when he's down. I've seen him at his best and his worst. So, but he's still around. Yeah. Thanks for asking, though. Oh, thanks. Thanks. Yes, sir.
I seem to have a vague recollection about the Fourth Estate being rooted somehow in French history or the Revolution.
Okay.
Can anybody expand on that?
This Fourth Estate is going to bug us. I wish I could Google right now. I could hit Google and have my answer. I should have my wireless smartphone. Yes, sir.
I think it's from pre-revolutionary France.
Okay.
You had three forces that ran the country: the royalty, the nobility, and the rich non-noble merchants and that. And then the Fourth Estate was the press that tried to keep at least some honesty in the system.
Right. Yeah. That sounds about right. Like I said, I never took journalism classes, so they probably teach you that in Journalism 101. I kind of learned on the job doing this, you know. Yes.
I'm sorry to take your time up again, but I just happened to think of something. I went to an elder hostel, and one of the things we did was take a writing course. And we were supposed to picture a house that we used to live in as children, and then just be quiet and then let all the memories come back to us. And I remember these things. The coal man used to give us a piece of coal so that we could play hopscotch. The ice man used to give us ice on hot days. And the Freihoffer, with his horse, which we all loved, used to give us broken cookies that we could eat. And I just think these are big back to some memories for people who lived in Albany.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure some of you also got your piece of coal, your ice, and your broken cookies. That's nice. I hope you'll write those down, like I say, because you know those kinds of memories people in your family would love to read. So I hope some of you will think about, or just get a tape recorder and speak into it and save that tape. Yes?
And that line, the Art Center of the Capital District over in Troy runs courses and programs on memoir writing. So if you're interested in it and really serious about it, it's a good place to go and learn about writing and how to get your memoirs together over the Art Center.
Yeah, there's actually, to give a plug to a friend, Marion Roach Smith, who happens to be the wife of my editor, Rex Smith, teaches that course in memoir writing and has taught it for over 10 years, had dozens of people come through, some of whom have published books, and she has a new book out on memoir writing. So she's really the best teacher in this area that I know of who teaches just like this, you know, learning how to put those memories into a readable, publishable form. So, but I'm sure every one of you could write a story like this or write a whole book. I mean, you all have those memories. They're inside us. It takes something to bring them out. It takes a little effort, but it's really worthwhile when you can read things like this. And there's many, many more on the website that didn't get into this published book, but I'll stick around if anyone's interested in buying the book. And thanks for all of you for coming. Appreciate it.